They've been called religious fanatics, even cult-like. To many Israelis, they're a mystery. To Netflix, they're a spectacle. And to much of the world, they're either exotic or invisible. Israel's Haredim are at the center of the country's identity crisis. In a nation where military service is mandatory, just 2% of this deeply religious community serves in the army. And only half of Haredi men have jobs. To many Israelis, Haredim are a drain on the country's resources. And the tensions between the two populations are threatening to boil over. But if all you know about the Haredim comes from the headlines, you're missing the bigger picture. They may be instantly recognizable, but that doesn't mean they're well understood. So I turn to the community itself to ask the question: who are Israel's Haredi Jews? Haredi is one of those hard to translate words that pop up in every language, like cheesy or schadenfreude. Most of the time, Haredi gets translated as ultra-Orthodox, but like most rough translations, that term misses a whole lot of nuance. Some people even find it offensive. After all, ultra evokes extremism, fanaticism, a sense that Haredim are doing too much. And maybe to some people, they are, because the word Haredi literally means one who trembles, as in someone so full of reverence for God that they metaphorically shiver and shake in his presence. But metaphors are one thing. Everyday life is another. So when I asked some Haredi folks to explain what being Haredi means to them, the same three themes kept popping up. Number one, being scrupulous about Jewish law, aka halacha.
להיות חרדי, הוא מקיים את מצוות השם.
They take the commandments of the Torah, which are held in common by all Orthodox Jews, even non-Haredim, but they see themselves as taking them a bit more seriously, with more rigor.
חרדי זה לציית לחוקי התורה עם כל המשתמע. הקדוש ברוך הוא ברא את העולם ונתן חוקים ודרך איך לחיות בעולם הזה, ומי שחי בדרך הזאת, אז הוא חי על פי איך שההוא שיצר את העולם התווה. אז עם אלה יש לו את החיים הכי טובים.
Roger that. Rule number one of Haredi life: following the commandments of the Torah. Rule number two: studying the Torah every day.
It really can be said that the dream of a Haredi parent is not that his son or daughter should win a Nobel Prize, but to be a Torah scholar.
If we learn Torah and we connect to the way of Torah, so we believe that we're bringing protection over us, over the Jewish people, over the world altogether.
So, being Haredi means following the Torah and studying the Torah. But the third pillar of Haredi life is a little more abstract and a lot more individualized. And it too involves another hard to translate concept: Avodat Hashem, best described as serving God.
חרדי זה עובד השם נאמן, בכל המובנים.
הקדוש ברוך הוא המלך של כל העולם, ואני העבד שלו.
The idea of I'm serving Hashem is part of the active vocabulary in Haredi circles.
All of these explanations were helpful, but none truly explain the difference between Haredim and other observant Jews. After all, lots of observant Jews follow Jewish law, study Torah, and see themselves as servants of God. So what differentiates Jews who look like this from Jews who look like this? To answer that, we've got to go back a couple hundred years to the 19th century Russian Empire, where things were, shall we say, not going great for the Jewish community. You might already know about the crushing poverty, lack of rights, pogroms, and general anti-Semitism that characterized Jewish life in Eastern Europe for hundreds of years. And you might look at that history and think to yourself, wow, being Jewish in the Russian Empire literally could not get worse. And then, Tsar Nicholas I was like, hold my vodka. The so-called enlightened monarchies of Europe were eager to integrate their Jews into wider society. On the plus side, that often meant more rights. On the minus side, it also imposed new obligations, like sending your kids into the Russian army. Tsar Nicholas I was a military kind of guy. For him, army service was the answer to every question. Want an education? Serve in the military. Want to learn a craft? Serve in the military. Want to be a modern, loyal Russian citizen? Lace up your boots, rookie. We're going to the front lines. But most Jews had no interest in the education or prospects that the Russian army offered. And they had a lot of very good reasons to doubt that the army would honor its promise to respect their religion. At the time, military service lasted 25 years, and all communities were required to send a quota of men of fighting age, usually defined as 18 to 35, unless you were Jewish. Jewish boys could be conscripted the moment they turned 12, forced into the army as children in an attempt to erase their Jewish identity. These laws ripped Russia's Jewish communities apart, because in a particularly evil stroke of genius, the laws required the community to choose which young men would be sent off into the meat grinder. Jew turned against Jew, each family desperate not to lose their children. Even if a boy managed to survive a quarter century in the Tsar's army, he would not return to his people as a Jew, but as a stranger. It was a living nightmare for a community that had already suffered so deeply. But the dark days were about to get darker. And ironically, it was the Jewish Enlightenment that set the stage for everything that happened next. Historically, outside threats tend to bring Jews closer together. The fiercer the persecution, the more tightly we cling to our traditions. But what happens when the call is coming from inside the house, when the threat wears not an army uniform, but a yarmulke? A century earlier, European thinkers had begun questioning everything. They called their movement the Enlightenment. As they saw it, humans had been in the dark for too long, blindly following traditions out of ignorance. They wanted the world to see the light of reason over religion, science over superstition, and individual rights over tradition. It's a surprisingly religious way of describing such an anti-religious school of thought. Once those ideas reached the Jewish community, there was no turning back. Modernity, in the form of the Jewish Enlightenment, had come to the shtetl, and devout Jews were completely unprepared. Many maskilim, Enlightenment-influenced Jews, had once been deeply religious themselves. Now, newly enlightened, they mocked traditional Judaism the way only a Jew can, with an insider's knowledge and an insider's scorn. Devout Jews found themselves surrounded by danger on all sides. They were used to threats on their physical safety, but this new movement threatened their entire way of life, and so did all the sub-movements that seemed to be cropping up by the day. Communism, socialism, Bundism, Zionism, all were answers to a fundamental question. As a Jew, how do I live in this new world? But for devout Jews, the answers were all there in the Torah, and any attempt to stray from that path was dangerous. Once, the only threat had come from the outside. Now, these devout Jews almost longed for the good old days, when it was only the Tsar's army that stole their sons, rather than silver-tongued Jewish philosophers who they saw as hypnotizing their children away from Torah values and into sin. There are no half measures when you believe the wolf is at your door. The only way to fight him off is to keep him out completely. And so some devout communities began to seal themselves off, not just from modernity per se, but from the constant threat to their way of life. The more the world changed around them, the harder they clung to tradition, becoming even more strict than devout Jews before them. And they kept on clinging, even as their communities went up in smoke. By 1945, 2 out of 3 Jews in Europe had been wiped out, leaving a generation of scarred and lonely orphans to rebuild a world that had vanished. They've been rebuilding that world ever since, as faithfully as they can. But ironically, it was mostly in Israel, among fellow Jews, that they found their traditional lifestyle challenged again and again. And in response, the community became increasingly strict, guarding against outside influence.
In Israel, they see themselves as kind of a bastion community that's been battling the forces of the Jewish Enlightenment for some 200 years. And that struggle was transplanted whole to the shores of Israel. Things got worse with the establishment of the State of Israel because the founding fathers of the Jewish state were generally not well disposed to religion, that's putting it mildly, and they saw themselves as basically under attack.
In short, the Haredi community in Israel feels like it's constantly under fire, fighting against the secular state. And as we said before, there's no threat quite like the one that comes from the inside. This is why Haredim in Israel tend to live in tight-knit enclaves, geographically close, but ideologically miles away from their secular neighbors. It's why they try to stay away from the internet, why they don't have TVs, why they don't go to theater or secular concerts. It's even part of the reason why they dress so distinctively. The way you dress is a big deal in the Haredi community. Every article of clothing communicates a wealth of information. A trained eye can pick out different sects and even ethnic origin from the sea of black and white. It's a whole world of nuance hidden in plain sight. because the Haredi community is far from a monolith. In other words, what might look like a homogeneous community is really multiple sub-communities living side by side. To an outsider, the differences are subtle, but all Haredim are united by the same three basic principles: following the Torah, studying the Torah, and serving God, all by guarding themselves from outside influence. And that means certain precepts are absolutely fundamental.
The way I dress as a Haredi woman, I observe many small laws all the time. So what I'm wearing right now is a wig. My head is covered. Married women cover their hair. My shirt will always cover my elbow. My shirts will always cover my neckline. I wear stockings. I wear socks in the summer and in the winter. I wear skirts. I don't wear pants. And I wear skirts that cover my knees. So all these things, they go into, it's a lot of details.
Haredim wear their difference proudly, as a proclamation of their faith, their unique way of life. But that particularism is often misunderstood. To some outsiders, the refusal to assimilate seems excessive, even archaic. Critics point to the Haredi community's uneasy relationship with technology or their seemingly inflexible gender roles as evidence of a stunted worldview. Haredim are well aware of their reputation among outsiders. Most of the time, they find that exaggerated reputation, with all of its misconceptions and stereotypes, more comical than hurtful.
I think the biggest misconception is that they see Haredim as living in the 16th century, that they're Luddites, that they're afraid of any kind of involvement in the secular world, and that kind of like very little separating them from the Amish, and that is certainly not the case.
But like any minority, they're also keenly aware they're being watched.
Every religious Jew is a representative of a bigger picture, because you meet one person who's wearing a white shirt and black pants and they're being rude to the guy in the airplane, or they're not, they're making a fuss over their seat, then forget about it. All of the ultra-Orthodox, all the Haredi people are narrow-minded, thoughtless, self-centered, whatever. So we're all very aware of that. And whenever something comes out of the news, or everyone has this inner teeth grinding, are you kidding me? Come on.
But it's Haredi women who face the biggest misconceptions from outsiders. Maybe you're familiar with some of the tropes. Haredi women are oppressed and uneducated. They're stuck at home, barefoot and pregnant, slaves to their husbands. There is no denying that certain subsets of the Haredi community have a problem with women in public life. It can be an uphill battle, but it is Haredi women who are leading the fight against their own marginalization. And while many Haredi women acknowledge that their society isn't perfect, they resent the automatic assumption that they are oppressed.
I've always been fascinated that people think that Jewish women are oppressed, because you meet any Jewish women and they are the most dynamic powerhouses of anyone.
In Israel, roughly 80% of Haredi women work, often supporting an entire family on a single salary. But though they are generally considered to be dedicated, diligent workers, not everyone is thrilled about seeing Haredi women in the office, or for that matter, anywhere. Some Haredi leaders have been accused of trying to erase women from the public sphere in the name of modesty, even going so far as to pixelate their faces in Haredi publications. Other leaders have called for Haredi women to stay home, claiming that higher education and a secular workplace can lead a pious Jew astray. But Haredi women have been challenging that notion, including the daughter of Israel's former Sephardic chief rabbi, who founded the very first all-Haredi women's college in Israel. Because a solid Jewish education isn't optional for Haredi women, it's mandatory.
What I want my girls to walk out with is the ability to think. I want them to be able to look at a situation, to think and to connect to themselves and say, what do I think? What do I feel? And that they should know that the Torah is something that is, we would describe it as, a blueprint.
We learn at a very separate path than men. We don't have so many issues with proving ourselves more than the men, having a glass ceiling that we have to break, or something we have to struggle to show that we are better or to get a better job than them. Since we're at a very, very young age, we don't have men that we have to compete with.
But that separation doesn't always extend to the home. Far from it. Behind many Haredi women is a Haredi man who is equally involved in raising the kids and keeping the house running. Haredi women might not use terms like feminism, but as many see it, they don't have to. They've been living as valued members of their society for a long, long time.
The concept of feminism is something that's like natural to us because it's like, oh, I'm so glad the rest of the world caught up, and they got the memo. But we value women. We always have. We protect women. We listen to their opinions. They are the core. And there's something called bina yisera, which means an extra intuition that a woman has that a man does not have.
But the most negative stereotypes of the Haredi community have nothing to do with gender roles and everything to do with the army. Since the founding of the state, Haredi yeshiva students have had an exemption from mandatory military service. But in 1948, that exemption applied to roughly 400 people. Today, Haredi make up 13% of the population, and critics have argued that it's long past time to integrate Haredim into the army. For obvious reasons, the Haredi community is skittish about forced conscription. Old wounds run deep. Plus, many Haredim point out that the army isn't designed for them. In fact, it's a machine designed to stamp out their way of life. The army is Israel's most democratizing, homogenizing force, a melting pot where people of different backgrounds come together in a shared mission. But there are dangers to the melting pot, like losing a unique identity you want to cherish and protect. And some Israeli politicians have been explicit about their desire to change Haredi society from the inside.
People on top of various parts of the government, sometimes unfortunately including the IDF, can be intensely anti-religious. The IDF is the big equalizer. Those Haredim who were supposed to disappear a couple of generations ago, if we could get them into the IDF under our terms and blending and living with others, they wouldn't be so Haredi anymore by the time they left.
That might sound conspiratorial, but for many Haredim, the army threatens their way of life. As they see it, everyone serves the Jewish people in their own way. They see their Torah learning and good deeds as an equally valuable form of spiritual protection for the people of Israel. The Haredi community insists that they can serve the Jewish people in other ways, that they have in fact been serving the Jewish people this entire time, sharing the burden of defending the state of Israel. Of course, many Israelis don't see all the volunteering, organizing, and giving that originates in the Haredi community, and those that do don't see it as sharing the burden. After all, there is no sacrifice quite like sending your child to the front lines, and that's the tragedy.
Why should my sons go to the army and protect Israel and risk their life for people that don't even appreciate it?
Haredim and non-Haredim are shouting past one another, each unable to see or honor each other's contributions. And so Israeli society is caught in an impasse between the Jews who believe that the Jewish state threatens their way of life and the Jews who give their lives to defend the Jewish state. For decades, Haredim and non-Haredim fought bitterly over the issue of the draft, and that bitterness cannot be erased overnight. But sometimes, it takes a catastrophe to change the status quo. On October 7, 2023, catastrophe came knocking. By October 8th, everything had changed.
So when the war broke out, after October 7th, whoever wasn't hurt, like physically, felt I want to do whatever I can to help. Haredi women, we have the highest percentage of volunteering in Israel for sure. We volunteer all the time. The whole time we help each other, but it's always inside the community. So I said, this is the time to create this bridge and to enable the Haredi women to volunteer outside the community.
Chana admits that volunteering isn't going to magically heal old wounds. That healing will happen slowly, if at all. But many in the Haredi community have a message for non-Haredi Jews, one that they hope will come through loud and clear, even if it has to travel over a massive gulf of mistrust and anger.
We respect everybody. Not everybody has to agree with what we are. There's plenty of things to talk about besides the things that divide us. My personal value system is like, let's leave all the major hot topics, which we're not going to solve because you know what? We're just not. There are people much smarter than us who are dealing with this. We're not figuring it out. Let's just connect as human beings. And as human beings, there's endless amounts of things to connect about.
Haredim may all look the same to an untrained eye, a sea of black and white, isolated from other Israelis. But look a little closer, and you see a world that is teeming with life and vibrancy and color. Jews have never and will never agree on everything. There is a long and hard road ahead to heal the rift between Haredim and non-Haredim. As the Haredi community grows, the status quo will become increasingly untenable, and solutions seem heartbreakingly far away. But if you ask the Haredi community, every answer can be found in the Torah. This is our guide. we must remember that every human being was created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And if we start from there, there is no obstacle we cannot surmount.